morning, everyone. I'm Major General D-Day Simpson. I have the honor of hosting the panel for today and moderating. I don't just get dressed up for anyone, but for the folks up here in the front over there, just don't pay any attention, there's questions. I do it just for them. So welcome to our Mission Capability Area session on Command, Control, Communications, Computer, Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance, or C4ISR. So today I'm joined on the stage by Mike Shortsleeve, Director of Strategic Development, General Atomics Aeronautical. James J.R. Gear, Vice President, Washington Operations, L3 Technologies. And then Eric Thompson, who volunteered to jump into the breach to fill in for Collins as the Associate Director for JADC2 capabilities for Collins Aerospace Systems, ISR, and Space Solutions. So I'm very excited to be here, and based off of the discussion yesterday with the Secretary and with the Chief, I think you have a good idea of what is going on inside the Pentagon and the focus. So we could talk all day on this, but to be able to do bad things to bad people, we need to be able to have C4ISR, to be able to locate those targets, to be able to pass them off so they can be actioned. So I'm just going to open up with a few words as the Assistant DCS for ISR, and then I'm going to leave the meat of the discussion for our partners. So I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but if you got a little of it yesterday, but if you haven't read Chief Brown's Accelerate, Change, or Lose paper, you need to. Based off that, over the past last several decades, we benefited from having a competitive advantage, and we're now at risk of losing that edge to our pacing threat, China. And it is happening quickly, and if we don't take any actions, it's going to change now, and it's going to be fast. In 826, we're working on 3 focus areas to be able to accelerate change in ISR. Number one, need to evolve our capabilities in order to proceed or to deliver persistent, connected, and survivable ISR for that next fight. Number two, need to shift from an airborne platform-centric design to a data-driven, problem-centric network. So away from the industrial age and try and get into the digital age. And number three, need to develop and employ the sensing grid as a cornerstone of our service make sense, and act strategy for Joint All-Domain Command and Control, or JADC2. So if you think about it on the 2 and ISR side of the house, we're kind of key stakeholders on the sense portion, and we also own quite a bit on the make sense portion. And these 3 focus areas require several enabling factors to be effective. We need to take an all-domain approach that is accessible and interoperable in a secure and survivable data environment. If anyone doesn't think that it's going to be a contested environment for our competitor, then I probably need to talk to you. Need our teams to be able to rapidly fuse, analyze, and generate insights in order to provide decision advantage. Need to modernize the exploitation and integration tools that make sense of the abundance of data available in order to turn it into actual intelligence for shooters and decision makers. And when I say shooters, I'm not just talking about physical and kinetic. So we're looking at non-kinetics as well. And then finally, we need to remain focused on enhancing the human and machine cognition to achieve those modernization efforts. Obviously, we can't nor shouldn't do this alone. The SecDef, and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force have made it abundantly clear that we need our allies and partners to achieve results today. So today I'm looking at many of you out there not in uniform as our industry partnership is a key teammates in our national security imperative. So I'm certain I made that sound very easy. So now I'll pass it over to my panelists to be able to give you their words. So Mike, you'll kick off, but before I do, just a quick reminder, go ahead and I'm sure they'll show it up on the screen, but text those questions in. I've got the iPad and we can pass those over so the panelists can go over to it. All right, Mike, to you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me here. You're at your own peril for having me up here to talk about some of this. I'm extremely passionate about C4ISR. It is something I've done my entire career, so I've got about 30 years experience total, 27 and a half years of that in uniform. So I recognize a lot of faces out here, and I know I'm going to get a lot of darts, either before or after this. But I do want to go ahead and just kind of say that it is a team effort that needs to happen here, particularly when we talk about industry and the military. And now being on the other side of it, I got to tell you that it's not as transparent as maybe those of you in uniform think it is. There's a lot of guessing that still goes on as to what needs to happen or what the solutions need to be acquired. So from that standpoint, what I would offer is that you need a framework for this first, and that begins really with an interconnected piece of vision, which you have already with the Chief of Staff talking about accelerate, change, or lose. Certainly, each of the different areas of C4ISR also have their own internal visions of what they need to achieve. So it all begins with a vision. The second thing that needs to work out, and this needs to be jointly effort between industry and the military itself, and the Air Force in particular, is the operating concepts that you want to develop based off of that vision. So that's the next step that you need to take. Then you get into the actual agile capability development and experimentation. And I think those are critical pieces because, one, you need to move quickly, right? In that development stage, we don't have time to wait 10, 15 years has been the traditional process. We need to have different processes there that allow us to move quickly. And the experimentation portion is important to that because how are you going to operationally evaluate those things that you're trying to develop? And you need to do that in a rapidly fielded manner. So getting things out to the field as quickly as possible. So that framework there is kind of, I think, a basis of it, that if you have a teamwork between industry and the military, you're going to definitely achieve a lot more much faster. So there needs to be more transparency in that. I also want to just take a time to kind of think about, when we talk about innovation and innovative thought, there's a few things for C4ISR that I want to impart on you. And there's some truths, myths, and then what I would call sort of alternatives that should be taken. The first truth is, whether you believe it or not, I certainly do, intelligence is the nation's first line of defense. And C4ISR is an absolutely critical piece to our nation's defense. And that includes awareness, indications and warning, battle space characterization. All of that has to be done to give our decision makers the opportunity to make the right decisions at the right time. The second truth I will say is every operation begins and ends with C4ISR. It's throughout the entire process. I know there's a lot of focus and emphasis on the strike capability and the combat capability that's required to take targets out, but the reality is if you cannot find the targets or don't know where they're at, it becomes extremely challenging, and the objectives that we're trying to achieve, we may never be able to do that. So it is, without a doubt in my mind, at the very beginning and at the end of everything. The other thing I would also offer is that competition phase capabilities have equal value to those in the conflict phase as well. A lot of times the focus tends to be strictly on the conflict phase, and arguably so, you do need that capability, but you don't need it at the expense of those capabilities that are going to posture you and create that battle space awareness in the competition phase. So when you look at that continuum of competition, which incorporates cooperation, competition, and then conflict, the largest portion of that is competition. And the reality is you don't want to get to conflict. So you need to have equal value in the capabilities that are going to achieve that. And we can talk more about that later if you have any questions on it. Now, some of the myths that I hear all the time that some of them irk me, and this one really does, is that, hey, in 2030, 2035, day one of operations, this is what's going to happen, or this is what we're going to do. Well, if you're thinking in this strategic competition era, great power competition, whatever you want to call it, that it's going to occur in 2030, 2035, you're really missing it. We're already in day one. We're like on day 1,000. Competition with these other powers never stopped. Our focus changed because we had to focus on the counter-VEO mission set, but the reality is that competition continues to exist, and they do have an edge on us because they've been watching everything that we do. So we have to think about how we're going to regain that advantage. So that myth of thinking that we've got time and that it sits out there is not true. And the Chief, I think, really stressed that in the Accelerate, Change, or Lose. I mean, in essence, I kind of view that as sort of, if you look at American history, that's Paul Revere going through the towns warning of the threat that's coming. So those of us in industry and on the Air Force side, we certainly need to make sure that we're heeding that warning and doing everything we can to make sure that we either maintain or regain the advantage in certain areas. The next one that I'll talk about is game-changing capabilities. You can go to the expo here and you're going to see a lot of remarkable things in all the different booths, and people are doing some great things. But the reality is, true disruptive innovation is actually rare. Now, continuous innovation on capabilities that perhaps you already have in your inventory, or some of those that will lead to further development of things, that's a more regular occurrence. But when people talk about game-changing, in my mind, that definition really is it changes the way you operate or it changes the game completely. A couple of examples I'll give you with that. One is iTunes. From the music industry, it was a disruptive innovation with iTunes. Before that, those of you, Toop, I know you had 8-track. There were CDs. I had to take the first shot at them. CDs, records, all of that. But when iTunes was created, it gave you a totally different way to purchase music and to listen to it any way that you want. Now, could Apple have stopped at that? That was a game changer. That was the disruptive, right? It changed a whole new game for that industry. Well, by introducing movies, TV, books, that was a continuous innovation that happened with that. So on the military side, if I were using an analogy, it's unmanned aerial vehicles. And not just because I'm representing General Atomics, I'm saying that, but it truly has been a game changer in the sense that it changed the game. Using unmanned capabilities changed the way that we fight. Now the thing is, how do we continue that improvement and innovation with that type of capability? The last thing I'll offer is some alternatives. So how do you approach this? In this extremely tight and fiscal environment, and I'm very familiar with that, having ended maybe that's why I ended my career in A8, working, planning, and programming, I did learn a lot in the fact that if anything new is coming into the Air Force budget, something's got to come out. And so there are really tough choices that the Air Force is faced with today. And when you're not quite sure what that fiscal environment is going to look like in the future, and most people will tell you it's probably going to decline, those choices become even more difficult. So there's not an either-or, I will say, in this alternative. It's not get rid of something so that you truly can have something different maybe 10 years from down the road. I would offer that, as I said, if disruptive innovation is a rare thing and you're in a tight fiscal environment, perhaps the continuous improvement is the way to go. And so look at the capabilities you have today, leverage those, see how you can actually use them differently. I can tell you now, pre-9/11, nobody would have thought the B-52 was a CAS platform. Using some of the things you have today differently will buy you time. And it also allows you time to do continuous innovation to those capabilities, which in the long run is going to mitigate the risk for that game-changing one that's going to come down the road. That's not saying don't invest in those game-changing type capabilities, but what I'm saying is look to what you have today, because I think that might be the easier and faster way to accelerate change.
So before I let you go, JR, Mike, you bring up a great point about the competition side of the house. So we need the capabilities to win if we ever have to go to war. So you don't want to lose. So you need that conflict capability. But it is something that we are talking quite a bit of. I prefer to deter and never get to that point. So how does it scare China? How does it keep them from actually getting there? Is other things that we're looking at. All right, JR.
All right. Hey, thank you very much, General. Hey, it's great to be here. Kind of touch and go if this was going to happen this year. I'm so glad it did to see everybody here, some really good friends I serve with, folks in industry. Yesterday was a great day. We talked about that when we came up here because we heard the chief, we heard the secretary, and their message was clear. We're in a pivotal part of history right now, point of history, that we can affect change. And the chief charged us to go out and do that change. The threat that's out there today is requiring us to think differently, right? To sense, to think, and act differently. The secretary talked about time. Time is a precious resource. We can't waste it. The chief charged the group that we can't wait for a crisis, a catastrophic crisis, to make change. So he wants us to be empowered. And I think industry wants to be empowered. Mike talked a little bit about the transparency. We can work together. The chief said that we have to team Air Force, I would imagine Space Force with industry to innovate. And when we innovate and we provide those new capabilities, we can't provide proprietary solutions. And we hear that loud and clear, right? So I think what I'm taking away from yesterday and today, the rest of this week, is that when we go back to our organizations, we have a sense of urgency every single day. I truly live it. I came from the Predator Reaper community, flying Mike's aircraft, and I was 24/7, 365, and I've kind of taken that back to industry. So I'll take that back to industry. We continue to focus on the problems at hand, and if we think about that, I think we can achieve the goals that you're laying out right here. I'm going to talk about 3 points, kind of things that we can do, I think, to create this next generation ISR system of the future. The first thing you might be, I guess, surprised to hear me say, and maybe Chris Coombs, who I saw out here, a friend of mine, is I don't think we need to change the acquisition process. And why do I say that? Because use the acquisition process to fulfill your needs, right? So we have the normal acquisition process. We've been given other transactional authorities, OTAs. We have mid-tier acquisition. We get on an IDIQ contract with many companies. Task orders come out, and we can respond to those task orders. But what you got when you have some sort of acquisition plan is that you have clarity. So what I'm here to say is that industry is ready to invest in the capabilities that we need. We'll do that. The clarity is important. But when you look, you talked about we need a design for data, right? A problem-centric network, problem-centric capabilities. And when you start throwing buzzwords around like multi-domain ISR, and you're bringing all this information together, that's hard to buy. And that's hard to actually develop, too, when you don't have that clarity. So many people in the room here are part of the PEOs. We are organized to buy aircraft. We're organized to buy weapons. We're organized to buy C4I, so communications and networks, and space vehicles. So that makes it a little bit hard. In the paradigm that you have up here, it's kind of interesting. So Mike provides the platform, a world-class UAV, the Reaper. Eric over here, Raytheon Collins, provides the sensor on there. L3 Harris Technologies provides the communications links. In the old paradigm, there was a mission to be had, a primary mission, put all that together, get it to a PEO, and train our crews, train the DCGS, exploit, make a decision, and act. And you can all do it with that one platform. I think we can all agree in this audience that we can make that platform more effective, more efficient, with the principles and the tenets that you're talking about, AAA, right? So you have augmentation, you have automation, and you have artificial intelligence. So if you actually have that as a requirement, you could service many more target sets with the sensors that are on the MQ-9 and get that data back into somewhere where it's used, or execute the capability on the platform. But let's just say we're in this new world, and that platform is part of a larger multi-domain ISR system that you need maybe a feed from space, maybe something from cyber, but then you have that MQ-9 sensor. How do you put all that together? Who's going to make that requirement and then make sure all those efforts are coordinated and bought and developed across multiple PEOs? So I think one thing that we're going to have to look at is that overarching construct of who sets the requirements. Certainly the COCOMs, the services provide the capabilities, but how do we acquire and develop that data across multiple PEOs? And we're ready to go for that journey. The next point I would like to talk about is that I think our sense makes sense, and ACT is as good as the communication links that we have, right? We have, that is the critical node. So we need resilient, agile communications and networks to bring that data back. That's really one of the key to build this kill web, this sensing grid that we're trying to achieve. And when you think about it, back into that MQ-9 paradigm, that platform and the crew can execute that mission as a single ship, typically the missions that they're asked to do. But if you're operating that capability in a contested environment and you haven't protected the links and you haven't used next generation capability, then that ISR data is not going to get to where it needs to be in a multi-domain ISR system. If you use that example for other examples that we're facing today, the threat, right? So the good news here is that capability is developed. There's multiple companies that have invested in this capability, making multifunction processors that are enabled with software-defined capabilities in a modular open systems approach. That's exactly what the chief's talking about, a non-proprietary system that we can get out there today. And then as the threat evolves, the threat changes, that software can change and evolve and go into that capability. And that's not a closed system that one company is going to control. You can provide that access to multiple companies to put apps into that capability, and then protect the links, or maybe do other things like AAA right there on board those platforms. And finally, I'll say, and this is a little bit of, I would say that you've got to put all that information together. And exactly what Mike just said is that let's start with what we have today. We have some amazing capability that we can scale a little bit further. CMCC has solved a problem of interoperability and be able to accomplish a mission. The Air Force's program of record for integrating ISR sensors is NCCT. That's network-centric cooperative targeting. It's used in one of the domains today. It could be used in multi-domains, and that's an open system that's being used over for 10 years. So that's operated or basically owned and resourced by one of the PEOs. And finally, I would say that this is a little geeky here, but what I've seen is if you spend the time on the front side when you're developing an ISR or a major weapon system, setting the architecture out, a government reference architecture that industry collaborates with the PEOs and the program offices, will settle on the architecture. That opens up the capability to multiple players, promotes competition, and then on the back, I think it controls cost personally, and I think that opens up the sustainment side. So once you feel that capability, the architecture that is published, the government is controlling that architecture, multiple players can come in and bring new capabilities, and just like Mike said, iterate those capabilities to continue to evolve to advance a threat. So, I'll just leave you. We have the acquisition tools in place. We have to be a little bit smarter, both industry and the government, how we use those tools to acquire multi-domain ISR capability. We scale, we connect, we make these connections resilient, and I think that we can have that sense, make sense, and act capability that you're looking for, and really outturn the adversary.
Thanks, JR. We talk a lot about data fusion, and having to be able to do that in a multi-domain capability is definitely going to be a requirement in this one in multiple contested environments. But being able to take that data, that information, and fuse it and turn it into intelligence, whether it's actionable for a physical or a kinetic effect, a non-kinetic effect, or for a commander or decision maker to be able to go from there. So I appreciate that. All right, Eric, so congratulations. So Eric is our lefty relief pitcher who just filled in at the very last moment. So, nothing like being thrown into the room with many of your friends out here to be able to talk about C4ISR. So, Eric, over to you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity, right? So I don't really have any opening remarks prepared. It was a bit last minute, the new world we live in with COVID. So, but I can speak for a minute or two on some of our experiences over the last 5 or 6 years with AI and ML technologies. A lot of the technology are there, and I think Mike and I had this conversation yesterday. The technology's there. Where we kind of have been falling short these last few years is getting that technology to you guys, the war fighters, right, and running it through the wickets. It's the policy and the doctrine that are going to really implement that technology. We can't just take one-for-one commercial technology, apply it to a weapon system that has a 3-1, CONOPS, and TTPs associated with it, and hope that it works well, right? So working with those weapons and tactics, officers in the community and the subject matter experts to really, hand in hand with industry, not only develop but deploy that technology that's going to make sense and solve that need. So it's there. We can shorten those time chains. We can get those decision-making cycles to a point to where we are effective and competitive in those more austere environments. And industry has heard the Air Force, right? It has heard the DoD. We need to accept more of that risk, develop that technology internally, and with our partners within industry, I think a little bit where we've been falling short is working with those operators as we develop and demonstrate that technology. It's great to leave that demo with a leave-behind capability, but do you know how to use it, right? Are your 3-1s updated? Are your checklists in place? Many of these algorithms, right, they're developed in a lab with canned data. They're not going to survive first contact with a real operational world, right? And I can see some heads nodding. I was there with you guys. We saw it firsthand. It works great until you really use it, and then it doesn't. So how do we not just pick it up and throw it away, but develop and deliver that in a way that you guys can learn how to use it, inform us to tweak it, modify it, use the processes you have in place today to employ that effectively. So as the partnerships, both with industry and the DoD, but also within industry ourselves, right, to pool our resources, to take that platform provider, that comms provider, those sensor, right, and work together to develop solutions that you guys can really put to use on the battlefield. And in an agile, I know it's a buzzword, but in an agile manner, right? This can be done relatively quickly. I think we have the tools, as you guys both said. So we're looking forward to it. It's exciting times. It's a challenge, but I think with industry and the DoD, we're moving in the right direction with many of the policy as it filters down through doctrine. I look forward to getting those capabilities out there.
Hey, thanks, Eric. So I'm not going to let you off easy. So each one of our panelists will get a question in the remaining 10 minutes that we have. And Eric, I'm going to start off with you, and I will give you the easy one. So what is industry doing to make data secure, accessible, and interoperable that can survive in a highly tested environment? And what roadblocks do you see, and then what's industry doing to overcome them?
Right, so we at Collins have taken an approach that a lot of that data needs to meet the timelines, are going to need to be processed and fused and analyzed at the edge, right? So that means giving those individual platforms that capability to do as much of that work as possible, and again, put that human on the loop to make those decisions. So we were part of the original consortium with OMS, so that kind of was our starting point. Let's take a look at OMS, let's take a look at those UCI messages and the tracks and typical, secure-ish comms that could come out of those, and how do we modify them to suit these evolving technologies with AI and ML. So that really has been our approach. Let's use the standards the Air Force has developed over the last few years. Let's use some of the tactical edge capabilities that are coming online, the mission computers, the multi-level security. As you guys all know, I'm sure, multi-level security solutions take time, right? They go through a process. So let's leverage out what's out there today, integrate those solutions, continue to develop those next-gen solutions, but really get it out on that tactical edge, use the standards and solutions that are out there, and feed back into those networks at the lowest level possible. And then as those networks become more robust, JADC2 starts to stand up, we can take a look at that at a higher order and start to fuse and analyze that secure data in a bigger and larger network.
Hey, General, do you mind if I add something to it?
Go ahead,
This
JR.
is just, it's a great point you just had there. And as Matt and Collins is making some sort of capability, and we're doing it unclassified or maybe in a secure capability, but we haven't gone to the next step because it's not adopted, it's not fielded yet. Then you get the next question, well, does it have NSA Type Certification? Right. That process is an entirely different process. And we're talking, it can be years, right? And there's priorities. So just think about that. So that's one of the things that we're looking at together collectively as an industry of how do you do things in parallel, or how do you speed up the process that's a very necessary process to secure our data with certified type encryption.
Thanks, JR. So, Mike, I don't want you to feel left out. So this is another softball for you. How does targeting push for innovation? What can they do to aid in cutting down the time in the kill chain?
Well, I think a lot of it, from a targeting perspective, begins initially, as I said earlier, about going in the competition phase. You have to establish battle space characterization. You need to see what's going on out there. Persistence is absolutely critical. And I'm not just talking about from an airborne layer perspective, but all layers need to work together to provide that persistence, because you need the chain of custody on certain target sets. And you need to maintain that as long as you can. And that gets much more challenging as you start escalating from competition to conflict. And so then it becomes the having to use different types of capabilities to maintain that targeting that you need. So, in essence, in my mind, it begins in the earliest stages that you can to start developing, if you want to use the analogy in a counter VEO, sort of the pattern of life of what the activity is, the regular order of battle that's happening, so that when the anomalies happen and you can't have the custody of that target, you at least have the latest information you can because you've been watching them.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we're not going to have 6 sensors staring at one Jamoke out there who's 6'4", wears a turban, and walks with a limp. Not in a South China Sea or Taiwan Strait scenario. So I hate to use a Pentagon buzzword, but scale. I mean, this is a orders of magnitude with the number of targets out there. JR, how effective has the Department of the Air Force been in providing data training sets to be able, in order to build machine learning and artificial intelligence? And I'm looking really at the emerging capability side of the house. And then what can we do to be a better partner?
No, that's a great question. So I think for all the hard problems that we've solved that needed those data sets, we get the data sets, right? We find that way. I think when you're trying to scale that and bring more companies in to build those algorithms and to use data, it gets a little bit more difficult. In the paradigm of full motion video, I think we've solved the problem. There's probably certainly more to do. But when you think of the RF world and how we're going to train on those data sets, cognitive EW and the ability to recognize change of signals is going to be increasingly important. Those are areas that we're going to need to look at. I think when you want to solve the problem, you can. And one thing I encourage my company to use, and also you probably use it as well, as cooperative research and development agreements, CRADAs. And I think when industry invests our IRAD, which is actually government overhead, government money coming in, I like to tie that to a customer, to a need through a CRADA. And that way we get some buy-in from both sides. CRADAs are one of those tools that you can share data, get security, DD250, for instance, and be able to get access to some of that capability. We also need to do more modeling in SIM, and I think at the end of the day, when we have the data to train our algorithms and prove that we have smart sensors, then we need to have some really valid and robust operational analysis to prove that that's actually going to work in the battle space.
Thanks, JR. Eric, how does the U.S. keep pace and regain pace in competition against an adversary who completely controls industry and operations, so that whole of nation approach?
Yeah, great question. So, I think it's competition, to be quite frank, right? The fact that we sit here and we can collaborate and work together, but at the same time, there is that open competition, right? Collins wants to be the first on the street with that technology, the same for GA or L3. So that competition is great and that cooperation. But we do have that technology advantage still, right? It's a bit frustrating sometimes. We've dumped billions into R&D. 2 weeks later, China steals it, and they got it for free, right? So that can be a bit frustrating at times, but we still are the U.S., right? We still have the best allies in the world on our side. So that open and free competition, and really leveraging that commercial market, right? There's billions or trillions of dollars in the commercial market that we can begin to pull into DoD capabilities to supplement some of those more robust and classified capabilities that we have. So between that commercial competition as well as the industry competition to keep pushing ourselves, to keep pace, they can keep stealing and doing what they can, but really the innovation, the edge is on our side, and we just need to keep pushing and trying to keep up there to do the best we can and protect our technologies.
So Eric, you bring up a great point that I'm certain we could do a whole nother panel at the next AFA of how do we secure our data to be able to not give China that unfair advantage. You know, if they're going to design it, you need to put some skin in the game instead of being able to acquire it through somebody else. Mike, what level of integration or deconfliction is being pursued at the joint level or industry level to prevent redundancies in the development of new C4ISR solutions?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because there's a lot of redundancy out there. You just need to read some of the headlines, and you've got, you know, a lot of redundancy within the services. Even within the Air Force, there's some redundancy of how you're going about developing things. It really begins with, I think, lanes in the road. And perhaps, you know, and some of you may have heard this, but maybe we need to review the roles and missions again to really define what it is that each of the services are doing. And from an industry perspective, you know, that we're going to align with what, you know, what you want to do. But the reality is, I think there is a lot of things that's a lot of overlap, and it's confusing sometimes on the industry side when, you know, you've got project convergence, you've got ABMS, you've got, you name it. I mean, there's a wide variety of different efforts that are going on that kind of do the same thing. So in reality, I think a review of maybe the roles and missions from the services perspective, as well as maybe taking an internal look at, do you have that duplication of effort, and maybe aligning who should be responsible for those things, particularly in the Air Force, give the lanes in a road that need to be there. And that might clear up some of this.
All right. So checking the time here, I think we got time for one more.
Well, and I could also piggyback on that as well.
Go ahead, JR.
Because here's the helpful lesson learned, right? The important safety tip for the folks that we work with in uniform. Just like Mike said, there's all these efforts trying to accomplish similar goals. And I will tell you, from an industry perspective, we kind of see everything. We have a different sight picture. We see this view. Admiral Doug Small with Project Overmatch, General Murray with Project Convergence. And they are making similar capabilities. So I will tell you, half the time when I go into a PEO and a program office, I'll spend some time talking about what the other services are doing. There are other programs that can be leveraged that have already solved the problem, but here's the dilemma, right? They're not their program, and they don't have that funding line. So, I mean, I'll just be honest, that choice, the choice that a program officer has to make is, am I going to send my money over to somebody else to solve my problem for my commander? And that's not an easy choice. So I think, you know, that's, again, when we're building multi-domain ISR capability, we're going to have to tackle that problem because there's multiple, pieces of data coming in, and there's going to be multiple systems that are collecting that data. We're certainly going to stitch them together, scale them up, but maybe sometimes we need to go ahead and say, hey, that's a good enough solution for this problem. We're going to use that as well.
Well, I would say that the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, the Chief of Staff of the Army, and the Chief of Naval Operations are all in sync and have all been in the room together to be able to help industry, but the joint requirements, so we can start to work those. Each one of you are approaching the problem from a slightly different set. So God bless Brigadier General Spaniard de Valencia, who gets a chance to try and put all that together. So I'm getting the 1 minute sign from Donna. So I want to thank everybody's time today. I greatly appreciate it. And please join me in giving a round of applause and a special thank you to our panelists today.